10 o'clock, we'll go ahead and get started. Hello, and welcome to the first in a series of webinars brought to you by the Texas Electronic Thesis and Dissertation Association, or as we call it, TEXIDA. These webinars are on the topic of what you need to know to digitize print theses and dissertations. I'm Clark Iakakis, a board member of TEXIDA, and I'll be your host for today's webinar. For today are Zach Lukemeyer of the University of South Carolina, Bill Lugo of Baylor University, and Rob Stats of ProQuest. I'd like to start by briefly giving some general information about our organization. The TEXIDA is to be a leader in the field of electronic theses and dissertations within the state of Texas and to serve as a model for statewide ETD associations throughout the nation. We were founded in 2009, and it is free and open for anyone to join, even if you're outside of Texas. And you join mainly by subscribing to our listserv at this link here. To provide a network of support for ETD professionals in the state of Texas and connect them with organizations and resources that enrich the work that they do. Before we started today, all attendees are muted to prevent background noise. We're going to hold the Q&A until after all three presenters have spoken. However, we encourage you to enter questions at any time. Ask a question by clicking on the Q&A button. If you have your screen in full screen mode, that Q&A button will appear if you mouse over at the top of the screen. If you have your window minimized, there will be a Q&A button in the upper right-hand corner. Please leave the setting to all panelists, and also if you have a question for a specific speaker, then just make that clear when you ask the question. Box, and you can use this for general comments during the session. It is being recorded, and all participants will receive an email with links to the recording and presentation slides. Okay, let's get started introducing our first speaker. Zach Meyer is the Electronic Thesis and Dissertation Coordinator at the University of South Carolina. He facilitates the submission and preservation of theses and dissertations, as well as offering support to the campus community on all things ETD. He is a member of the South Carolina Library Association and has presented on copyright issues related to ETDs at national and international conferences. He'll be presenting on dealing with copyright when digitizing legacy theses and dissertations. And here's Zach.
Thank you, Clark. Share my screen here. Can everybody see my slides? Hope so. Out today by going over some copyright basics and how theses and dissertations fit into that picture. Then we will talk about determining permission is necessary for your project. When to digitize and post or share any given pieces or dissertations, one of the basic questions you have to ask is, do I need to get permission? If you need permission, then obviously you can move on to the practical use. If you need permission, that's a big block because it's difficult to move forward until you sort that out, and getting permission presents a set of challenges in and of itself. So we'll look at sources that will help us determine whether we need permission. This is the end. We'll briefly discuss some of the potential consequences of copyright infringement. Okay, of the presentation when I tell you that I am not providing legal advice, and if you need legal advice, you should talk to an attorney. But honestly, I'm not just saying that. I genuinely encourage you to get your institution's legal counsel involved in early stage for projects like this. That's an important step to protect yourself and your institution. But counsel may have experience and institutional knowledge that can help you as you go through this project. But it would also be a good idea to document everything. Try to have a clear paper trail every step of the way. There's no confusion down the road about what actions were taken and why. Okay, so theses and dissertations fit into the overall copyright picture. The basic concepts or assumptions that I should make clear. First, we're talking about U.S. law here, specifically Title 17 of the U.S. Code. Consider what Title 17 tells us about the types of things that qualify for copyright protection. We will know that a thesis or dissertation meets those statutory requirements. It's an authorship existing in a tangible form. Digitizing a thesis or dissertation available falls under the umbrella of one or more of the exclusive rights held by copyright owners. As we know, when we want to exercise any of those rights and we don't own the copyright ourselves, we'll have to get permission unless our use falls into some kind of exception. On the assumption that the institution does not own the copyright of the item in question. So into a full analysis of determining if we're looking for hire or not, but I did want to mention that before we move forward. If you're not work for hire or a work made for hire, that's a work that was created as part of an employee's duties, and the right of those types of works belong to the employer, not the person who actually created it. The laws have specific requirements regarding what constitutes a work for hire, so it is possible the thesis or dissertation could fall in a category, but I do think that's unlikely for the vast majority of dissertations or theses. And I'll be sitting under the assumption that the you want to digitize are not works made for hire. And we can assume that the author holds copyright, though of course it may not always be true. The author could have assigned copyright to someone else. An institution probably does not have claim over the copyright of the thesis or dissertation. But if it doesn't, of course, no permission would be needed. All right, start sending out permission requests to all of your alumni. I want to determine which dissertations and theses you can go ahead and digitize and share without needing to ask for permission. It's important to remember that the analysis of copyright status of a work, any work, any dissertation or a thesis, must be done on an individual basis. You have to consider each dissertation or thesis individually. I know about dates and the public domain, but before we get to that, let's consider another possible reason why you would not need permission from the author or copyright holder. Need to ask for permission is if you already have that permission. So if an institution has already been granted a license to do all the things that you need to do as part of your project, then no need to obtain explicit permission again from each individual author. When license, that's just permission to use the work in some way. It's different from a full assignment or transfer of copyright, which the copyright holder sends away a right and then can't exercise that right anymore. License can be more flexible, and the rules for the way it can be granted aren't quite as stringent as they are for an assignment. In context, a license can be implemented into institutional policy. So you have a document explaining exactly what we're going to do with the dissertation, and by every student, you may still be able to carry out your project if the policy is written in such a way that allows your intended use. The law is when a student matriculates, she agrees to the institutional policies. So if she affects a license, this has granted permission. You don't, for particular buzzwords like license or permission, there's not really a formula to follow there. And this is one instance where it might be a good idea to have a conversation with your university council about your policy. It doesn't explicitly mention digitizing and posting on the internet. Your policy language might still give you what you need to carry out your project. Explain what you're trying to do, and then determine if your policy would allow that. If this falls within the parameters of the license that was granted by the student, then you won't have to get separate permission as part of your project. A possible reason no permission would be required is because the term of copyright has expired. Copyright protection does not last forever, and eventually it will expire, at which point the work falls into the public domain. Important to note about works in the public domain is that no permission is needed to digitize or make available those works. or anyone else can dictate what anyone does with that work. It can be freely copied, distributed, or displayed without the need to obtain permission. So there are works in the public domain can be tricky, but there are some resources out there that can help you with that. In addition to really old works for which the copyright term has expired, citations and theses may be in the public domain because the author did not adhere to the law's requirements to qualify for copyright protection in the first place. Under the current, we know, copyright attaches automatically, but that was not always the case. The law had strict requirements that authors had to follow in order to obtain copyright protection, and if they failed to follow those rules, entered the public domain. For most of the century, in order to qualify for federal copyright protection, a work had to, 1, be published, and 2, bear notice that it was under copyright. Interesting discussion regarding the question of whether print dissertations made available by a library or distributed via microfilm meet statutory requirements for publication. It does seem to be divided on that question. Some groups have concluded that yes, they should be considered published, while others have reached the opposite conclusion. Ending that debate today, but for what it's worth, I'm of the opinion that they should be considered published, which leads to the second requirement. Dissertation or thesis did not bear copyright notice, then it entered the public domain. For a project, this makes it relatively simple for us to determine whether permission is needed regarding theses and dissertations published during a certain date range. Does there copyright notice? If so, permission is probably needed. If not, then no permission is needed. This notice question is only relevant for works published during certain periods in the 20th century. Now, at the chart, this is the Cornell public domain chart that many of you are probably familiar with. There are other charts like this out there. This sort of describes specific dates and categories that can make the issue of in the public domain a little bit clearer for us. Thankfully, a lot of the legwork has been done for us already, so we don't really need to reinvent the wheel here. Here we can see we're looking at the status of works published in the U.S. I'm not going to chart, but I will point out a few categories. First, we can see anything before 1923, published before 1923, is in the public domain because the copyright has expired. If your institution has been granting degrees for a long time, that could be a good place to start if you're looking for a pilot program to get your project started. We do not need permission to digitize or share citations and theses from prior to 1923, whether they're copyright notice or not. That's pretty straightforward. You can see that everything after the first day of March 1989 is still protected by copyright, even if it doesn't bear notice. So that's really easy to keep straight. It's between 2 days, so things can get complicated and confusing. The main of that is because the law has been revised over the years through things like the Copyright Act of 1976, the 1988 Berne Convention Implementation Act, the 1992 Copyright Renewal Act, and the 1998 Sonny Bono Copyright Term Extension Act. And for digitization, you probably don't really need to know all those details regarding why an item is in the public domain or not. If you do want to dive into all of that, there are certainly resources out there that can help you. For the most part, if you just want a quick answer about whether it works in the public domain, this chart and charts like this is possible. The area I want to point out is works published between 1923 and 1977 that do not bear copyright notice. Those are also in the public domain, reasons that we just discussed. So about notice or copyright notice, maybe I should have mentioned this before. You're looking for the copyright symbol, that C with a circle around it, or the word copyright, along with the name of the copyright owner and the year it was first published. I'm here specifically because it has the potential to produce a lot of items that you can digitize and share without needing permission. Easy to check, right? You know when it was published. So if it's notice, you're giving permission. If not, then no permission would be needed. You don't have many items from before 1923, and you're looking for some hanging fruit to get your project started. That'd be a good place to look. Several other categories here, depending on the particular circumstances of the dissertation or thesis. And this is just telling us which items are in the public domain. So if something is not in the public domain, but you already have permission or use it through some other exception, item status is still under copyright, won't necessarily mean you have to ask for permission. But as I said, this does a lot of the heavy lifting for us, and it is a really useful resource. We're out of time here, so let's go over some basics of copyright infringement. Obviously, we don't want to violate anyone's copyright. We don't want to use other people's intellectual property in ways that are not allowed by law. Everyone will, of course, perform their due diligence to make sure that doesn't happen. But what if you think you don't need permission, so you go ahead and digitize and share a work, but it turns out you were wrong, and you would have and obtained that before you proceeded, with potential consequences in that scenario. Well, there is such a thing as criminal copyright infringement, but that involves willful infringement for the purpose of financial gain, so hopefully that's a scenario you'll have to worry about. But in that, if someone discovers your use and believes that her rights have been violated, she can choose to bring a civil suit in federal court. If successful, then you will have to cease the infringement and also have to pay money to the plaintiff for violating her rights. That may be characterized as actual damages, profits, statutory damages, or fees and costs associated with bringing the suit. Actual damages would be the harm caused by the infringement. So due to the infringement, the copyright holder lost X amount of money. It would be the amount the infringing party made by the infringement. With the Copyright Office before the infringement occurred, statutory damages could be awarded instead of actual damages and profits. And that means the court has a discretion to award an amount between a certain range for each infringement. From the $750 and the maximum is $30,000, unless the court determines that the infringement was willful. In case the maximum is $150,000 infringement. A successful plaintiff may receive compensation for costs associated with the suit, such as attorney's fees, again, only if the work was registered before the infringement. In other words, no statutory damages or these fees could be awarded if the work was unregistered at the time of the infringement or 3 months after publication. As in one infringement, the consequences could be severe. However, to my knowledge, no one has yet sued a university for digitizing and sharing a thesis or a dissertation. I'm not saying it will never happen, not at all. It's very possible it could, but we don't have any previous cases to guide us and we know for sure what kind of penalties to expect. As a fact, the particular case will be very important in that. But there is a risk that you'll infringe someone's copyright and then be sued for it. I'm not going to speculate regarding the likelihood of something like that happening, but I would encourage you, again, that might be another conversation to have with your institution's counsel. I believe I'm out of time. Last slide here is just some further reading that may be helpful as you get your project started. For listening, and thank you to the CETA for inviting me to speak.
Very much, Zach. That was excellent. I'd like to remind you to please enter questions into the Q&A box if you have questions for Zach, and we will be asking those at the end of the session after all three speakers have spoken. Next speaker is Billy Peterson-Lugo from Baylor University. Billy is currently Director of Digital Library Services and Systems in the Library and Academic Technology Unit at Baylor University. Some of her responsibilities include the library's digital collections and institutional repository, scholarly communication, copyright, library systems and technology, and access to resources. She writes a quarterly column, Tech Talk, for the Library Instruction Roundtable Table newsletter. She received an MA in Library Science and a BA in English from the University of Iowa. Today, she'll be discussing working with ProQuest to digitize legacy theses and dissertations. And Billy.
Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, depending upon your location. And if you bear with me for a minute here, we'll get my slides. So everyone can see my slides. So what this is really a tale of two times, then and now. And I'm really going to, what I'm going to do is about one library's perspective, why we chose to work with ProQuest digital dissertations, and then why we chose not to work with them. I won't go into the details of what ProQuest can provide because that information will be covered more effectively by Rob Stapp. Talking about then, which was fall 2002, spring 2003, and now, which is fall 2017. Background information, Baylor University is a private institution. In fall of 2002, we had an FTE of a little over 14,000, and now we have an FTE right around 17,000, so you can see that that's a 20% increase in roughly 15 years. As graduate students go, these are the numbers, and there has been a very significant increase in graduate, not 49%, and about 69% of that is happening with the doctoral students. All dissertations are required that all dissertations are sent to ProQuest, and some people voluntarily send their master's theses. So the numbers of what's currently available from Baylor University in the ProQuest system, and you can see we have a lot more dissertations than we do have theses, and you can also see the time period there. We implemented electronic theses and dissertations of fall 2005. We get about 175 submissions a year. So we're not a huge institution. We're not a small institution. We're somewhere in the middle. We have just under 2,000 ETDs, and that includes both theses and dissertations in our repository, which is Bear Docs. A bit of background, which is sort of important to this scenario, which is in fall of 2001, the Baylor Libraries and Information Technology Services merged. So Information Technology Services is administrative and academic computing. In spring of 2002, the Electronic Library was formed, and that was a merger of library technology and academic technology. And I've listed what those four academic technology units are. The library technology represented the area that I was in at that time. And an important piece about this is it also brought these two budgets together. We're together, but we're separate, but are more together than we are separate. In the fall of 2002, the Greater Baylor is a member of the Greater Library Alliance, which is a consortium, and ProQuest made an offer to digitize pre-1977 microfilm dissertations. So these dissertations they already had, they come on microfilm, and they wanted to digitize them, one, to help us, and two, to help them, because it gave them more digital content for their database. I'm just hitting the primary deliverables for us, which would have been PDFs of the dissertations and MARC records, and those MARC records could also contain optional durable links. They would be accessible to Baylor at no additional cost. If we didn't subscribe to ProQuest Digital Dissertation, we do, but if we didn't, they would have been in a separate resource called Research at Baylor. The digitization fee was ultimately going to depend upon the number of participants from GWILA. Decided to go ahead and move forward with this, and the reason we did it was a really good price break. We found as libraries participated that we got the lowest price break that they were offering to us. Because of the merger between library technology and academic technology, we definitely had the money to cover the cost. At then we had no in-house digitization facilities, so this wasn't even an option for us to consider. relatively small number of dissertations that we were talking about, somewhere around 900. And basically, there was no work on our part. We just, wrote a check. And this was a win-win proposition for us. This really worked out well for us, and it worked out well for ProQuest. And the outcome was that we had our dissertations that were microfilm digitized. They're made available to us via research at Baylor as well as in ProQuest Digital Dissertations database. We obtained the PDFs of the dissertations because at that time we had no institutional repository, so we really didn't have a good place to house them. We also chose not to get the MARC records because we already had in-house MARC records. We've been cataloging them for years and years and years. And it's easier for the cataloging personnel at that time not to deal with how to solve the issue of now we would have duplicate MARC records with 856 links and some without. And that's why we made the decisions that we did at that time. Now, if we go forward to fall of 2017, we have another proposal from ProQuest to digitize our print master's theses and remaining print dissertations. So interestingly enough, we didn't quite get all of our dissertations. This is going to be a rough overview of the proposal. So basically, the proposal covered the cost of shipping the theses and the dissertations to ProQuest. Some would be unbound and discarded, and some would remain bound and would be returned to us, so that cost was covered. They would be digitized, and they would also be microfilmed. So this would give us a microfilm copy, which could be considered a preservation copy. Create metadata. They would return to us the digitized content, the metadata, and as I said before, bound theses. This would be a year project with the cost distributed over 5 years, and that was our particular agreement. Your mileage may vary. And this gave us an opportunity to remove volumes from our shelves, so libraries are always looking for how they can get more space in the library. And it would also give us the opportunity to make all of our theses and dissertations available digitally in our Baradox repository, so we would have a more robust repository of all of our ETDs. A bit more information related to the specifics. We queried the system, and we estimated that we had, you can see there, about 5,655 print theses and dissertations. No, these are just the theses, actually. And 2,200 of them were in one location. So that meant we only had one copy, and it was our best guess that they would want to keep a print copy. So that meant that we would have to send the bound volumes, and those bound volumes would have to be returned to us. And we had over 3,000 where we figure there are at least 2 locations, and they could be digitized, unbound, and not returned to us because we would still have a print copy. Dissertations, we had the same issues. Some had one location, some had multiple locations, but we had fewer than 100, so it was a very small number to deal with. And we had many with accompanying materials, and this is the best estimate. There may be things that we just don't know about because it wasn't captured in the MARC record. So somewhere around 114 folded plates and maps, CD-ROMs, one that had a whole volume that was just maps, one with a zip disk, if anybody knows what a zip disk is, one with an audio CD, 2 video cassettes. So these would also have to be considered in the digitization process. And then, as I said before, these are just the things that we found because it was in the MARC record. There may be other things that would be a surprise. Ultimately, we made a decision not to pursue this issue right now, or this project right now. We determined that it would really require us to ask for additional funding, that we didn't have a way to cover this with existing funds. The other thing is it would be a significant amount of work for us to pull together the print theses and the dissertations and ready to be shipped off, because just because the online system says something is located someplace, that doesn't necessarily mean you're really going to find it there. And we knew that in some of the locations, it was really questionable whether there was something there. We currently have very robust digitization facilities, so if we wanted to, we could do this in-house. We also have an excellent metadata librarian, and so it also enables us to handle it in-house if we decide to pursue it that direction. And the big elephant in the room is that we need funds and personnel time to migrate to a new online system, and at this point, this has a much higher priority, and we really do need to focus in this particular area right now. So we've put this project on hold. That doesn't mean that we wouldn't go back at some time in the future and pursue it. Would still be a trade-off. It always boils down to time or money. So we can pay someone money to do this for us, although even that will involve some time library personnel. Or we can use existing library personnel and their time to do it in-house. And so that's a decision that has to be made further on down the road. But this is a perspective of why we made a decision that we did then or back in the future, and why we made the decision that we made now. And that is what I have to say. So thank you for your attention, and I hope you found some useful information there.
All right. Thank you so much, Bill. That was excellent. Again, just a reminder to attendees to type questions for Billy into the Q&A box. Our speaker is Rob Statz. Rob joined ProQuest in 2005 as part of the Bowker Market Research and Analytics team. For 15 years, he has held roles in several areas of the company, from collections to SaaS. Ryan working with Dissertation Digitization in 2015 and is now responsible for business development in North America. Out of ProQuest, Rob can be found surfing, singing, and championing a healthy, active lifestyle with his wife and 3 sons. He'll be presenting on digitizing legacy theses and dissertations with ProQuest. And here, Rob.
I don't even know if I can get an answer to that. So I appreciate that, and Zach and Billy, you guys were so thorough, and I think that your presentations were excellent. I believe, yes. Okay, let me see if I can get the share. All right. Yeah, you're wonderful, and I hear a little bit of echo from my presentation on Billy's, just because a lot of what she spoke about is just the process of what we go through normally. What I'd like to take a look at is some trends that are going on right now in the industry, and why people are digitizing. Also, we'll talk a little bit about ProQuest's position in the space and what we do, and then also like the impact of digitization on your content and collection. So, look, in recent years, I just started with the dissertations and theses in 2015. So my 10 years was more on the research and actual book publishing side since ProQuest and Bowker. And I was learning kind of on the fly about dissertations and theses and digitization. And so I realized I feel like I've gone back to school for that. But it's neat to see the trends as they're developing. Right now at Chris Borg, the library director at MIT, and she released her letter about station and our responsibility as academics in making research discoverable globally. Right? Really, what she said is that when content is not available, it's only available in a physical form, it's really locked out of access, because the researcher today is looking for. If it's not there, they just tend to down and don't look for it more. That's more and more. So we want to the conversation that's going on by making things more readily available. There's such a large gap there. So if we put it online, if we don't make it discoverable, eventually it's just going to be shut out of the conversation, and we won't see the scholarly research that is available, and it's so important. Digitizing, there's a bunch of different reasons. The trend now of space reclamation and changing what the library is offering to the end user, whereas they can now sit in the dorm room or on a park bench and access a lot of the collections and content, what's bringing them into the space, so they can shared workspaces and other technology rooms and things like that, that the staff become, I hate to say it because they are cultural artifacts, but they take up space because they're not getting used. So we've looked at the cost of maintaining the space and just having it there, and it comes out to about it's a little over $14 per linear foot annually. But when you stretch out over all of the collections, over the whole collection, it's a big chunk of change. So schools look at that and they say, well, if I'm already spending that, I can attribute some of those funds in the project to digitize that. Working with a school here on the East Coast that's got some damage on their books, and some of them are well over 100 years old, and they're decaying. They have mold and other damage that are to them, and so now it's like we can digitize them and hopefully, stem of the damage that's been done to their collection. And that's that. There's other things that happen too. Some don't have the bibliographic data that like they do. So they look to us as when we digitize, they can improve that. Actually, that's another thing that's going on at that same school that I just mentioned, is they have a card catalog. They don't have any other record of what's in their graduate works. And it's 3 different schools that were brought together over the last the last 100 or so years. So it makes it more difficult for them to locate titles and just to understand what's in the collection. So they're looking to us to help them in that. And the other side is disseminating the work out to the greater workspace. As Borg had mentioned, recently American University had undertaken a project with us in 2016, and Nancy Davenport, she is the university librarian there. I met with her, and she felt it was very important for us to understand the level of scholarly output that was being done at American. So she's very gung-ho to digitize and make it readily available. So that's the reasons. Those are just some of them. And where we've come from, and this is one of the reasons that I really embraced the business development for what we call DAP. It's the Digital Archiving and Access Program, where we digitize theses and dissertations. The evolution of where ProQuest started, right? 80 plus years ago, UMI began preserving graduations in microfilm. And digital are the new microfilm. But we see microfilm as a preservation backup, right? And we saw those in Iron Mountain. But for the most part, where researchers are going is where we're putting it. So that's really our position. I like being involved in that. I like being able to take the position of the ProQuest of UMI at the time and moving that forward. So we've been the Library of Congress database of record for dissertations, repository there. And Dissertations and Theses is the largest human-curated repository of dissertations and theses. We have the knowledge, we've got the timeline, and we're so proud of that. Right? Thank everyone for participating. There's over 200 libraries that have digitized with us, 700 libraries that have their content in there from 60 nations. It's it's PDT. It's the backbone of ProQuest that we offer. It's an access program. It's a repetition of some of the things I said. We've got the dissemination. Get out to the 4,000 plus colleges that are subscribing to PQDT. We've got the preservation aspect and enhanced access. If you have students that are working, that are distant learners, or if they're overnight and they can't get to the library during open hours, not shut out from the content, they can easily download it, full text, continue on with their research. I like the little fun fact down there that we've digitized more than 13 million pages. I don't know if you can see so well, but this is a dissertation from the University of Southern California. It's from Kennedy and from 1932. In 2014, we got a call from USC. They were in a bit of a hurry that they were about to move all of they needed to move the content out of the library because they were undergoing a renovation project and really plan for what to do with it. They thought they'd be able to keep it where it was, and in a matter of weeks, it had to go. They have 40,000 records. They got to us, for repetitive quote. Also, like, what can you do to help us? Because they didn't have the staff or the manpower to and get everything out of the building. It was 4 tractor trailers worth of content that had to come. We had to help them to assist in that, as well as just the digitization, but also the packing and the labeling and making the packing list. So that was where we really got to experience firsthand what libraries go through. So we don't have the people to do that right now. We understand. And when it's a burning issue or just something that's required, we can offer those services as well. So when we're in enhancing access, right? Consideration, we digitally scan the file, whether it's from microfilm or it's from paper. Electron beam camera, there are in the world. We have one. I think the Chinese government has one, and I believe NASA might have the other one. So we use very tech equipment, right? And there's not much of it out there. We do create a microfilm, as I had mentioned, as a backup. We send over to the Iron Mountain facility in Pennsylvania. It's under armed guard. Don't walk up there trying to find someone's location if yours might be in there. They're not happy about it. It's not that we put it under armed guards. It's that it's housed in the same vault as the Disney archives. So if you want to see that, you could also see like the original copies of Cinderella. Right? We use humans to index it. We do OCR data once it's scanned, but then human editors go through to map out the indexing. You supply metadata back to the schools, compart records. There's flexibility there where you can choose formats from marked records. And then discoverability, right? It goes back to dissemination. We make digital copies available through ProQuest dissertations and theses. Supply copies back to the institution if you have an institutional, regardless whether you have the institutional repository or not, the copy is yours, right? You are able to do what you want with them. Put them in an institutional repository. If you have a shared repository, you're welcome to do that. We do abstract and index with that, and that the full text is available with the 35 major disciplinary subject indexes, so that your math, science, psych info, and so on. Just go through Google Scholar and through Summon and Primo, which is our in-house or Ex Libris in-house time. Dedicated house staff, most average tenure is about 15 years for each of those. So they're skilled and they understand how to handle fragile or oversized works or specialty color. As Billy had mentioned, they had a lot maps and fold out and plates and other content. All that is we're able to ingest any kind of special material. Large-scale digitization projects are not uncommon for us. And what's large to one school is not large, and we understand that. So we try to understand and deal with each situation as if the most valuable output from the school is the dissertation and the graduate research that's there, and we understand that, and we treat that as such. The other option would be if you're not using ProQuest, there's in-house, or there's using a low cost or a vendor that could be local, not necessarily even low cost, but some they are. Our competitive, but we do offer a lot of other, I don't want to say supplemental, but value to this conversation between the indexing that we provide to the metadata that we create, our that are in there, And then our technology capabilities exceed about everyone who's out there in the marketplace for that. I'm trying not to make this too much of a commercial, but if I ask you to speak about digitizing with ProQuest to do something other than that. So when you get, what happens next? Like, so you receive it, you get your content, you get the whole section, you load it into your institutional repository. Look, here is some data from it's at UK University, their initial LSE. And look here at the orange line. So they have some decent growth, or some novel over time growth from actual institutional repository. But what did their dissertation after the dissertation project? 262,000 to 430,000 downloads in a year. So there doesn't just, through the institutional repository. This is not what people are downloading through PQDT. So that's being accessed there, but you also see the impact to your institutional repository because of the value of having the data, the files that are in there. And we look at 2-year period of a smaller, mid-sized U.S. university down in the bottom right corner, right? That's doubled over the course of a year. From 50,000, actually it's more than doubled, to 124,000. So views and abstracts and downloads. It's pretty much when you look at that. This is I'm sorry, it's the thesis 1925. You can see kind of how the scan works out, what the quality looks like. This was microfilm first, I believe. So it's the scientific method and achievement of Aristotle and Bacon by William Dickey. They digitized it. In the 90 years that it existed, before they digitized it, 3 times. After they digitized it, it grew 10 times. I believe that's in the first year that it was available. That's particular when you think about how it was there. People, if they could have accessed it, they would have. And once it's typically, go checking it out. For me, I appreciate your time, everyone. And if you have any questions, by all means, feel free to ask either in the Q&A or reach out to me after the fact. Back to you, Clark.
Thanks so much, Rob. That was excellent. So now we have some minutes for a Q&A. We have a couple of questions in there. We highly encourage you to put any questions you have, any additional ones. First question is for Zach, and the question is asking you to expand a bit. You mentioned it in passing. Expand a little bit on whether theses and dissertations are considered published.
Great question. I mentioned that briefly, but there is a discussion. This seems to be ongoing. Is a dissertation or a thesis considered published or unpublished? It does have some significant consequences as far as permission that you may or may not need. A couple of the resources that I mentioned for my further reading dive into that question specifically. There's an article by Clement and Levine that explores that in some detail. I need to reach the conclusion that the NCs made available by library or film through someone like ProQuest or UMI would be considered published according to the language of the statute. So one of those resources I mentioned found the opposite conclusion. No, they should be considered unpublished. I think that might be a question to have with your particular counsel. Again, I'm not trying to determine or decide that debate once and for all. It's an interesting discussion. But personally, I do feel that when you look at the language and what case history we have, that they should be considered published, right? They are according to use language of the statute, they are distributed to the general public by sale, lease, or lending. So you think about status of an item in a library catalog made available there to the public, it seems to fit that description. The other issue is, what about things that are available in the ProQuest situation? With a different thing than something that's just strictly available through a library catalog? Again, those are discussions that would be interesting to have with your university council. Help shed light on the status there of that particular issue.
Thanks, Zach. Next question is coming in for Billy, but Rob, if you have anything to add, please feel free after Billy's answered it. And the question is there a way to extract OCR searchable PDFs from ProQuest to upload into your repository?
Well, we're discussing this back in the fall. One of the things that I wanted to get, in addition to the new content that would be digitized, I also wanted to get our other theses and dissertations that had been digitized in 2002, 2003. I wanted to get those because now we do have a repository, we do have a way to deal with the metadata, and that was part of that discussion. I suspect I could probably get that stuff now if I pursue it further. Rob can answer that question. But that's sort of where it lies. I think for a period of time there was some kind of an argument going back and forth about whether or not libraries could have that content because of copyright issues, but I think that has since been resolved and is no longer an issue. So, but Rob speak more to that.
Okay, so Billy, first of all, yes, you could absolutely, you're entitled to those copies you had need to have digitized 16 years ago, just because you didn't have somewhere to store them. That shouldn't prohibit you from those are yours, and we can work with you on that. The other part of the question, let me go through it again, so I thought and I spoke out of my plan. All right. So when we things I mentioned, there was in my mind that if they came through us from 2002 that were for microfilm first, if we microfilmed them through UMI, at that time the author signed an authorization for publication. So the microfilms that you have, if they're done through UMI, they appear and UMI. Otherwise, there's that. I've missed. Maybe you help me and Zach. I'm sorry, Clark. Could you repeat the question and then I can get the answer because I had it and then lost
Sure.
it.
Is there a way to extract OCR searchable PDFs from ProQuest to upload into the repository?
Yeah, there is. And that you can extract them or them one at a time if you have a subscription. Not necessarily actually for use in the repository, but we can use anyone about that if it's something that's in bulk or in small. If you're digitizing, then that all comes with as part of the package.
All right, thank you. Next question is back to Zach. If university does have an intellectual property policy covering distribution of theses and dissertations, would you recommend including this policy as a reference in the repository metadata, for example, in the DC rights tag?
I don't think there's any harm in doing that. I don't necessarily think that it is a necessary step. In other words, even if you don't do it, it's not like that will be the deciding factor of whether or not you have the permission you need. But I'm of the opinion that transparency is always a good policy. So if you want to make it explicitly clear what you're doing and why, for if I'm not misunderstanding the question, I think that would be a good idea. but again, I don't want to insinuate that that is a necessary step that you have to take, and if you don't do it, then you're violating someone's copyright. Does that make sense? I hope.
Yeah, definitely. Zach. The question is for Billy. What approach or methodology is Baylor using to obtain permission from thesis and dissertation authors?
I mean, the ones that are already in our repository and that are embargoed, or do you mean for legacy dissertations? Well, we have an approach because we haven't fully pursued it. Occasionally, we have one-offs that come to us, and if they're recent enough that we have a way of knowing how to contact the author, we will contact them and ask them if we could make a digital copy of their thesis or their dissertation, and could we put it in the repository and make it openly accessible. And there have only been a handful of those, and they've all been positive. They've all said, yeah, go ahead, that's fine. On a larger scale, if we were to pursue this, to a certain extent, I would use some of what Zach talked about in his presentation. So there's certain, I would consider that they're already published, and so looking for that copyright notice would be the key and the appropriate time period. Yet I would consider, and this might be for things that are more modern, but if we have any that are highly creative, I think long and hard before I would make them openly accessible, because that's different than, say, a totally scholarly work that may or not turn into a scholarly book. But if it's a work of fiction, for example, I would think long and hard before I would make that openly accessible without clear permission from the author. I mean, there are kinds of things that feed into this. There's part of me that would be inclined to do what we've done with some of the things in our Black Gospel Music Restoration Project. We've identified things that are low risk and medium risk as far as sound recordings go, and we've made them openly accessible, along with a statement that says, if you're the copyright holder, please contact us, and we work with you.
Do you have another question for Billy and or ProQuest about the comparison estimates for the cost of digitizing print versus microfilm?
I'm sure I'm a good person to answer that question, because what we did was 15 years ago, and it was through a consortium, so it was a very good price break, and I think it changed in 15 years, so I think it's probably better for Rob to answer that question than me. I can cheaper back then than the proposal that we got in the fall, but the proposal in the fall was a whole lot more work for everybody.
Larger batch as well, right, in the fall,
right,
than 15 years ago. Plus, right, so the cost variation depends on a few things. It's microfilm is easier to digitize, and we have it on site typically, so that's a lower cost than paper does, and theses are less, they're pages, so they are less expensive or less costly than doing a bunch of dissertations. And special handling or special situations, special conditions, obviously, that's handled on a case-by-case basis. I would say you could estimate, or for a large-scale budget, between $25 and $35 per title, with some flexibility for things, but just that builds in room. I would say that gives you a nice liberal budget, so that you're not short change or short in the budget when you start to look at it. And all of those factors, if everything's microfilm theses, because you don't have this or PhD, then the lower side. If everything is paper and probably doctorate, and there's color and large layouts and graphs and maps, full pieces, there'd be additional fee that could the price. that 25 to 35 is a good ballpark.
I would add to that to consider, are you going to, the shipping costs are included, so that's the shipping going and the shipping coming back. So the question is, can they be unbound and do you want them back? Because I think if they can be unbound and you don't want them back, I think that's going to give you a lower cost as well. In our case, we were we have about half and half.
All right. Well, thanks so much, everyone. We're coming to the end now. Please, to all attendees, thank you very much for attending. Please keep an eye out. We'll be sending you a copy of this recording. We'll also be sending you a link to provide some feedback. And it's very important to us to hear what you have to say and also to plan for future sessions. So please respond to that link. Thanks very much to all of our presenters, Zach, Billy, Rob. A big thank you to Ben Wong of Baylor University for providing support for this webinar, and thanks to all of the members of TechSEDA for hosting this. We have our next webinar scheduled. It's called Digitizing Dissertations and Theses In-House Planning and Implementation, and be hosted by Joy M. Perrin of the Texas Tech University Libraries, and that will be held next month. If you subscribe to the TechSEDA listserv, you will get information about it, and also feel free to go to techseda.org. And thanks very much for joining us today. We hope you enjoyed it, and have a great rest of your day.